Dr. Brynn, welcome to the Rising Author Experience. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join me. As a renowned applied neuroscientist, speaker, and author, your work in optimizing workday performance and helping professionals is truly inspiring. I've been following your insights on LinkedIn and watching some of your YouTube videos, and I'm genuinely a fan. So I'm excited to have you. So today I'm like really excited because I know you just launched a book like recently, like 2 weeks ago. Is that what it was?
Oh man, yeah, I think actually less than that. Last week, officially last week. Yeah.
Last week, that's right. And I've been kind of anticipating it, and then I kind of was like hesitant in reaching out because I was like, oh, I don't know, I think she's gonna be really busy. But I reached out, and here we are. I'm so excited to have you. So I'm very lucky. But I want to jump right in, Dr. Brynn. Your book is awesome. I got the privilege, obviously, because you sent me an early copy to kind of read through it, and I, went through and highlighted a bunch of things. And I'm actually waiting for my physical copy to get here tomorrow, but I got the PDF and I really loved it. It was exactly what I needed to hear, what I needed to see, and what I needed to read this week. Your book highlights this idea that it's our brains are a marvel, a masterpiece, but also a misfit.
Yes.
What personal or professional experiences inspired you to write this missing manual, if you will, of our working brain?
It is exactly that. It's a missing manual. Well, thank you for having me, Hussein. Yeah, it's so nice to be able to connect because we know each other from another space in life years ago. So it's nice to be able to reconnect together. You're right. Like the book was really born of an avatar that we called Corporate Kristen, but is actually me 20 years ago. And so it is my professional experience and personal, I guess, that really was the impetus for a lot of this research and for the direction of the manuscript for sure. And we often say in academia that research is me search, and so of course, what was interesting to me personally became part of my vocational and professional life and research. And so that book, it starts on, to your point, that the idea that as a premise, sort of like undergirding, here's what you need to know about the brain. Is that it is a marvel, it's a masterpiece, and it's a misfit. And so it's a marvel of amazing super technology, right? Like the world still, even with AI, even with AGI, like artificial general intelligence, they've really perfected compute, but the human brain has a lot more intelligences than just compute. Even with compute, if we look at like the super technology, the biggest supercomputer in the world is called Frontier, and it does 2 exaflops of data calculations per second, but it uses 21 million watts of electricity to do that, of power to do that. You, on the other hand, do 1 exaflop every single second of your life of data computation. However, you use like an apple, a coffee, a glass of water. Like you're way more,
way more renewable.
Yes, and more efficient, like orders of magnitude more efficient. So, your brain, and then, humans, we have interpersonal intelligence, kinesthetic, all types of emotional intelligences. So we have all these intelligences that tech still has not, approximated. And they're so important, especially for the workday, especially in career. So that's that marvel piece, is just how marvelous your human brain is. It really is like still the most amazing thing on planet Earth. At least I think so. And then masterpiece is the idea that our brains are highly neuroplastic. You really do program and prime and create the neural circuitry in your own mind, your way, both conscious and subconscious. And so you've got this really amazing machine that you are constantly molding, whether you know it or not, and whether you like it or not. So said differently, a lot of it's happening while you're sleeping, so you're not even aware of it. And a lot of what is happening in your mind is actually happening in your brain, and the way it's actually physically and functionally, neurofunctionally situated and manifested is happening to circumstances, to stimuli, to things in your world and your environment that you wouldn't even want to encode necessarily. Like you don't want it to happen into your neural networks, but it does, it gets encoded. And so that's that masterpiece thing, is like this idea that you have to just be we remember it with our kids. I don't know if you have kids, Hussein, but like we tell our kids, hang out with the right people, don't read the wrong things, don't subject yourself to bad video games, don't watch scary movies. We forget to do it with ourselves, and our brain is constantly encoding this stuff. So everything we subject ourselves to becomes the masterpiece of our mind. And then the third piece, misfit, is the idea that you are a misfit to the workday, to the modern workday, because our brains work on a combination of circadian and ultradian cycles that ebb and flow all day long. And here's when you're most likely to be productive. Okay, Hussein, about 7:30 in the morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock, 45 minutes to an hour after you've woken up and you've started to wake. And then 7:30 and 8 o'clock at night when you get what we call a semicircadian second wind. Yeah.
Yes.
But not during the day, not during the 9 to 5. So it's a misfit to the modern workday, which is 9 to 5. And actually, other than being asleep, your lowest cognitive point consciously, like while you're in waking hours, is likely to be about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's exactly when you're at work. So your two highest points of the day, not likely at 9 to 5. Your lowest point of the day, likely when you're at work. So then it becomes imperative, or, you realize at that point that there is alternatives to the modern workday that probably work better if we're working with our brain instead of against it, in order to be our highest productive, most cognitively optimized self, right?
Yeah. Wow, so beautiful and so well articulated. And this is what I'm talking about. The book is amazing because you break down these essentials of like how we see these things in our brain. And I loved it because, what I picked up from the book, and even you talking right now, in our Middle Eastern heritage culture, my dad used to say, we basically, we get up early, we pray, we do our work in the morning, and then afternoon is for like, rest and prayer and like sleep and like take a nap, which is like, the thing in Spain, like you take a nap because that's when you rest. You need to give your brain some time to rest. And of course, like this kind of also obviously kind of relates to like farming and that kind of world where you do the thing in the morning, you kind of take a break in the afternoon, and you come back to it later in the afternoon, and you're a little bit more aware in the evenings. And again, in our culture, like the evenings are a lot more hang out with your family, whatever, and you're more social and you're more in tune. And everything you're saying right now really resonates with me because I feel like that's when I'm the most productive, is literally between 7 and about 9:30, 10 o'clock. And after that, I'm just like, I don't really want to do stuff anymore, and I kind of have to push myself to do it. So I'm glad you shared that. That's really
Which I prefer if you didn't. Like as soon as you have that circus cymbidian is big word, but don't worry about that. That second wind of the day, as soon as you crash from that, is actually your natural bedtime. And so that's when I would hope that you would actually go right to sleep and not try to prolong it. Because when you try to prolong it, Hussein, and like, so let's pretend, I love a lot of what you just said, we can unpack it. But when you try to prolong sleepiness and lack of productivity, you're actually increasing your beta waves. And beta waves are the anxiety producing ones. And so especially when they occur by themselves and not in combination with gamma waves, that's the cognitive peak, or in combination with like other things. And so at the low, like at the most restful, most relaxed you'll be is alpha and theta waves. And there again, if we see only alpha or only beta, we've got probably problems. And beta waves show up by themselves when you are pushing yourself too hard, too long, you're not giving yourself enough of a break. And so in the evening, a lot of people do report this exact thing. This is when I'm most productive. I'm really creative. As soon as you crash from that, go to bed. That's the time to go to bed.
Yeah, perfect.
And then
I love that.
Like a lot of what you were working on then will also be what your brain continues to work on as you're sleeping as well. So it actually is very helpful for creativity and for it, like new ideas, for the development of intelligences, for the skills development, for, coming up with like new stuff. If you're a creative person like you are, like I have to be, then it's a really beneficial thing is to do some of it, have it be top of mind as you're going to sleep, because it will be what your brain works on.
I love that. And I feel like I saw a YouTube video that you shared about that specifically, especially for creatives, and that you don't need to force it. Like I love to paint at night. That's kind of my like second thing is like, I love painting. I love like drawing and graphics. And I love that. I like kind of getting tired doing that. And then that's when I usually tuck away. I haven't been very good at it lately, but that's something that reminds me like I need to get back into it, because I do feel so refreshed in the morning when I do that, because it doesn't require a whole lot of like brain power per se in the moment while I'm sort of in the creative zone. But when I do wake up, I'm like full of ideas. Like I'm full of like, oh, I need to do that and add color here. So I do love that, and that makes total sense. God, this is brilliant. You tackle some myths though, right? Because there are a lot of people out there who have these myths like we only use 10% of our brain and multitasking is efficient, which are myths, of course.
Yeah.
So why do you think these myths persist, and how can
Mhm.
we debunk them to transform how we work?
Yeah, well, I think, they're just so, especially if you look back on like psych and a lot of brain sciences, what I'm going to call the kind of inclusive brain sciences, all the way back to like Jungian and Freudian days, we see that like we didn't have the right neuroimaging technology. We couldn't really look inside. And so instrumentalists like Skinner used to refer to the brain as the black box. Basically, you had no idea what was happening in there. You put information in, information came out, who knows? And so a lot of that pervaded still, because there's just not everyone speaks the speak of the academicians who were at the forefront of understanding things better. And so I think a lot of that pervaded. There's another reason, and I do put this in the book and under Misfit, I think, but the idea that a lot of what we wanted to have happen in our brains was part of the Industrial Revolution, a very profitable time in American history and in the world's history. And that's just not, it turns out, how, especially as knowledge workers, creatives, people who have to use their brain as their primary factor of production, that's just not how our brains really naturally operate. And so a lot of these myths pervade because they're wishful, frankly. People want their brain to work this way. They want to work like a machine, like a computer. And they want to believe that there's more potential that they're not tapping into, hence the 10%. And there's a lot of reasons for the 10% myth. We think it originated because in the 1970s, they thought that actually consciously, you're only doing about like 10% is conscious, the 90% isn't. We think that's less than 1% now. Like most of your brain is non-conscious. You're using all of it. Like you're using every single neuron in there. There's no question at all. There's another reason we think that pervaded that 10% myth is because in neuroimaging, when we look at what's active at any one moment, like if I give you a cross section at any one moment in an EEG or in an fMRI, I'd see that about 10% of the brain is active every moment, but not all at once, right? Or else you'd be like frying.
Right.
We don't know exactly where all these myths come from, but part of the imperative of the whole manuscript and of this body of research of mine is to dispel these myths, because I don't think that you can use your human brain as effectively as you should be using it if you are working on falsehoods. And so dispelling some of that is really important for understanding what this thing is and what this thing isn't, especially in an era of like AI and AGI, when people are just so worried that their jobs are about to get eaten by something else, like by a machine, or they have no future in this career or whatever, because they're panicked. And the only way to quell, I think, a lot of that fear is to understand what you are, how well you work, but also what you are not, and where your natural tendencies lie, and how naturally we have faults and weaknesses and issues, and we have to give ourselves the requisite nutrition and rest and environmental circumstances in order for that organ of ours to work to work as best it can. So understanding it, dispelling the myths, really important for using it better.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I love that so much, because I feel like every now and then I'll still hear that randomly, and I'm like, that's not very true. There's way more. We are way beyond that phrase of mine. That thought process. But I love how you dispel those things. You also introduced this concept of the brain's ultradian rhythm. I think I'm saying that right. With phases like climb, peak, fall, and valley. How can professionals use this cycle to optimize their workday? I thought this was really interesting.
Oh, it's such a great question. Yeah, thank you. It is also like the better part of 5 chapters in the book or something.
Right.
Excuse me, I don't know where this cough is coming from. It's the basic rest activity cycle is true of almost all organisms on Earth. So we have, some amount of rest, some amount of uptime, some amount of rest. In the human brain, we used to think that the human brain worked on a circadian rhythm, which was that day, night, light, dark, sleep, wake cycle that is 24 hours long. Actually, it's 23.5 hours long. And we used to think the brain worked like that. And then in the 1960s, researcher Nathaniel Kleitman, he was doing sleep research. He's the one who figures out like REM sleep, non-REM sleep, different cycles that are happening in short order, these like K spindles, like all this stuff that's happening in short spurts. And then they repeat themselves. And so then we find out that that is not just true during sleep, it's also true during the day, something we call the basic rest activity cycle of the brain, the ultradian rhythm. Excuse me. And so then that actually goes through what I kind of relabeled what we say are the ultradian, what do they call that even? Like an ultradian climb, but I call it the climb, it's something else. And then the ultradian peak, or ultradian peak moment, and then the ultradian stress response, and then the ultradian healing response. And I just simplified it to say it's really just like a climb, literally like a climb, if you were on Mount Kilimanjaro, a peak, a fall, and a valley. And we know how long those need to be. We know what neurochemistry is happening. We know what brain waves are active during these different cycles. And so then, yes, for a professional to understand this is to understand, well, my brain doesn't work like a computer. I don't have just, 70 minutes every day, or 8 hours every day, 7.5 hours every day to get my work done. I have these like little sprints every day according to the ultradian cycle. And so we know that the climb, the peak, and the fall, they take about 90 minutes under perfect circumstances. And then you have the valley, which is 20 minutes, again, under perfect circumstances, sometimes a bit longer, sometimes a bit less. And so what we see is that for a professional, you have to know that unless your circumstances are perfect, you are not going to have 7.5, 8 hours of a marathon of a day that you're going to be able to get things done. You only have, and some researchers believe it's half of 90. So like not 90 minutes, like 45 minutes. And you have to follow it with breaks. And so the way to then conceptualize your day is, firstly, you are going to have these frustrating moments called the climb and the fall, where you're gathering attentional resources, or you're feeling a lot of irritation, frustration, and little like other negative emotions start to creep in. Those are not going to be your optimum moments. So you need to know what to do in order to, create better optimum moments at the peak. And then you need to take more breaks. And so your whole Yeah. So what we know is that if a professional understands that their brain works according to an ultradian rhythm, and one that is not necessarily 90 minutes of productivity, but probably shorter than that, right? Some researchers thinking it's closer to 45 minutes, sometimes 60. Then what you know is you have to organize your day in a series of sprints. You need to plan for a lot more breaks. You need to optimize those breaks. And so then it does give you a lot of insight into how your day should be structured. Now, if you also go back to that idea of misfit, we also understand that like you're not very likely to be experiencing your peak performance during the day anyway. And so if you have the opportunity to, schedule, to sort of modify or customize your own workday, you're very much more likely not only to be working with your own human brain much better, but to get much more out of yourself with less strife, right? Like you're not calling on your willpower and having to power through difficult times. You're actually feeling like you're a lot more productive, but naturally so.
I love that. Wow. It's so, I'd never thought about, like, because like you said earlier, there's a lot of research and, you hear about all the science about what happens when you sleep and the rhythms of your sleep and how you got to optimize for that and sleep early and all those good things. And then drink water and all that good stuff, right? Eat, whatever. But I never thought about it during the day and what your brain cycle is doing throughout the day. So I thought that was fascinating. I love that you kind of walked me through that a little bit. You definitely go into depth about that in your book and how that really helps us understand, like, yeah, why am I crashing around this time? Why am I doing this? Why do I feel this? And it's, I honestly don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about the day's rhythm of what's going on with my brain.
Really?
Honestly. And I've done a little bit of research. I haven't done the deepest research in the world or anything like that, but this is why I follow you. This is why this stuff is interesting. Again, it's like, yeah, there is probably, I've probably read a few things here and there, but I've never thought about, I just kind of push through the times where I'm like not feeling 100%, in my, instead of going with the actual flow of things. But now that I understand it a little bit better, I can kind of not be rigid and go more with that flow.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you breaking that down, especially as a creative, right? I feel like the creative person, especially as a writer, speaker, artist, whatever, I feel like those are even the peaks and valleys are probably even more. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know.
I think that you would be like more in tune to it because implicitly that you are using your brain as a factor of production. Like it's so intuitively and implicitly and viscerally even like this thing that I'm using to produce is starting to wane, and that's when like the fall is very challenging for people. It's when negative emotions come in. We sometimes call them ants, automatic negative thoughts. negative motions come in. I know I say it's not the insect, it's the other thing. It's the automatic negative thoughts. So if you start to notice that, you're definitely in the fall. This is also when halt sensations start to take over. Halt stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I sometimes say the T also stands for thirsty. But it's the idea that like halt sensations, suddenly you're craving salt, fat, sugar, because when our bodies spike in stress, that's what you want. Or this is when in the moment in the day when you'd be doing something and you're not necessarily lonely, like clinically, classically lonely, but like you'll feel like, you know what, this is way too big. How come I don't have more help? Or how come I was asked to do this all by myself? Or you know what, my group mates, they're not doing any of this project with me. Or I can't believe I don't have more support. You know, that kind of thought process is that lonely piece. And then, yeah, all of a sudden you're like, you know, you're hungry, you're hangry, you're lonely, you're thirsty. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the fall. That's how you know you're in the fall. And then of course, in the book, I have like a bunch of ways to like just deal with it. But effectively, there's really two main takeaways. Don't try to push through it. Like that's just the moment to get up and walk away. When the going gets rough, the rough get going. Excuse me. And then, yeah, you take a break and you take a functional break, one that is going to like maximally reset and restore you.
Can you tell me a little bit about that break? I like to go on a bike ride with my dog sometimes. And like I live in Tucson, Arizona, so it's predominantly nice most of the time, which I wanted that in my life. I wanted to be able to like, okay, it's nice and sunny at least, or a little overcast. But I usually go take my dog on a little bike ride, or I go for a stroll. But can you tell me a little bit about how to better take a break? I mean, is there something I should be eating or drinking or anything like that, or something I should be avoiding altogether? I don't know.
Yes, I love it. So actually what you're doing is perfect. So what we say is get outside, breathe fresh air, be in like nature and greenery in outdoor environments that are organic. Like in organic environments actually register in the brain very different than interior environments. And they increase your vagal tone, they decrease your sympathetic nervous activity, they increase your parasympathetic nervous activity, just like seeing like trees and rocks and rivers and stuff. Very good for you. Interacting with other people is great. Pets are a great substitute as well. Like they're a proxy, but they don't quite activate the mirror neuron systems and some of those emotional centers in the brain. And so I love a pet, but I would love it if you had like your spouse and your pet or something, you know, someone else, something else. Not eating and drinking at every break. That's the temptation. People think, okay, I've got to replenish my neurochemistry. I've got to eat to do that. Snacking is actually detrimental in a lot of ways. It creates insulin surges. Those surges, even if you're not, you know, you're normally functioning, not hypoglycemic, but you are still going to get a rise in your insulin. And actually what that does is often serves to create not just a crash, depending on what you've eaten, but it decreases your ability to focus and concentrate over time. So you'll feel like all of a sudden you have a little bit more energy, but actually you're having a harder time paying attention and inhibiting distractions. So not to snack. I do love the idea of drinking, but a lot of people will like wait until the break to have anything, any fluids. And actually it's a really good idea to sip all throughout your day. So like, yes, perfect. Sipping constantly, because what you do is when you gulp a lot of water all of a sudden, it can't all be redirected into your through your blood work, in your blood system, through your vascular system, into your cellular systems, because it would cause you to be like lightheaded, right? And it would dilute all of the electrolytes in your blood. So if people chug water or they drink a bunch of water all of a sudden, it's not going to get introduced into your cells. It's going to be rediverted into your bladder. And so then you have to go to the bathroom more. And the challenge with this is that you're then not actually getting the hydration. So people are like, but I'm drinking my water. I'm drinking water. They're not doing it right. You're just not doing it right. You've got to like sip consistently so that it can slowly, without diluting your electrolytes, be introduced into cellular networks. And then what we often say is by the time you feel thirst, you're dehydrated at the cellular level. So actually what I ask is that, yeah, I know thirst is a weird one. It also gets really confused with hunger. It's very often that you're thirsty, you're not hungry. You actually don't need a lot of food. Like it's amazing. The brain doesn't, the body doesn't. It's intermittent fasting is a real thing, you know, even in nature, because you just don't need an onslaught of what is actually an inflammatory, energetically expensive process all the time. You don't need it constantly throughout the day, but you do need water. Like the same does not hold for water. Anyway, so the whole idea is that you would be sipping water all day long, but never enough that you're like going to the restroom too much, and never too little that you actually feel thirst. Because by then you're already emaciated those little cells. So you're sipping, but like not even all that thirsty.
Wow. That's great for my break taking. And knowing now that drinking water like throughout and before the break and then enjoying the break and not eating and not drinking and just like, because I'm used to fasting. I've been fasting since I was little. It's Ramadan. It's I'm Muslim, so it's like part of our heritage. But like, and I've like I love that, but I didn't realize how just sipping water throughout the workday as opposed to chugging water is different. To be honest with you, I didn't realize that. That's really cool.
And if you're like a
wealth of information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do love it. But if you like, let's say you're an athlete or you're working out and then you feel thirsty and then the temptation is to chug a lot, you're just going to get like cramps, right? You're just sloshing around a lot of fluid. So actually for your workouts or for even if you're not an athlete, like just for your workouts, that hydration had to happen hours and hours and hours beforehand. It can't happen in the gym. It's too late by then. It hasn't been introduced into cells. So yeah, you want definitely breaks are like not the time to chug water. They're not the time to eat a ton of things. They are the time to go for a walk, get out in nature. We call that green exercise. My other favorite piece of advice for breaks is limit it to 20 minutes. So not longer than that. Great research to show too that you've then surpassed your ultradian productivity zone and you're having basically like such a big code switch that you've lost the plot on the thing you were working on. But don't let it be less than 15 minutes. You need at least about 15 minutes for all that neurochemistry to replenish itself, the neural networks to kind of rekindle, the synaptic clefts to clear. And so you need at least 15 minutes, but not more than 20. And my favorite thing is to move just a little bit. And what we call that is like non-exercise movement or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. But it's the idea that you're kind of like not fidgeting, but you're just like moving, just like physically moving, and not stationary. And there's a reason for it from a neurocognitive perspective for professionals. And it's that it helps activate things like the default mode network and a lot of the other neural networks in your brain that are not conscious, but that help you kind of like reset, restore, replenish, consider the pro forma contingencies of things and have you feeling a lot fresher. So if you can kind of physically move, it activates those networks. But not huge exertion where you have to focus, like not pump an iron where you could hurt yourself or sprinting or anything.
Right.
Like a dog walk or like doing some laundry or doing some gardening or wandering around the office. These are all perfect for activating the parts of the brain that are important for those networks that are really highly restorative during what we call the ultradian healing response or the valley.
So powerful. So you go around the world talking about this stuff as a speaker as well. And you've made your way through some of the most amazing, from Coca-Cola to everything else in between. I feel like just watching your website and like looking at all the things you've done. How long have you been doing that? And how has speaking, how is that sort of as an author, as an expert, right? A lot of our audience, they're experts at different things, a variety of things. And some of them move into speaking, some of them move into coaching, consulting. How do you find that when you go out and speak to these organizations, what's like the thing that they really latch on to as far as like how, productivity / workflow, all those kinds of things play together? What do you find the thing that they're always asking about that is sort of, I guess you can say, like a through line through your work, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I think the number one thing that for me was the most shocking, I guess, because I'm not surprised when people are interested in their brain, like that's a through line. They're interested to understand, I am in kind of control, or I do have a human brain that is designed to do all this and designed to kind of help me work and so on. So that realization is kind of like I see that eureka moment sometimes. People realize again that, like I am this machine that controls everything about me, all reality, perception, personality, outcomes in my life. So that's a through line. But the thing that I think, and part of the impetus for the manuscript that and you touched on this earlier, like that was shocking maybe, or like counterintuitive, was like really highly educated, very high performing, very high producing people that were operating based on complete myth, based on misinformation about their brain. And so that was one of the, the reasons I did get thinking like, this is not because they're dumb or because they're undereducated. It's just because we just have a lot of mis and disinformation in the world associated with our brain. Again, because partly of, information from yesteryear and frankly, otherwise wishful thinking is that we'd have these employees or factors of production that would just be like machines or computer. And so That I think is like one of the pervading factors for me, with like everyone from senior executives, top floor, to down. Like I've talked to, automotive companies that are right on shop floor, my students at all levels. Like I've had undergrads, MBAs, executive MBAs, PhD students. If you don't know, you don't know. And so it just requires that information and education. And once you know, I often have said, and I say, I think somewhere in the book, that once you know better, you do better. And so if you know your brain better, you can do better, but you can't do that if you have the right information. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Seeking knowledge is always going to help you unlock something, and especially about our brain. And I feel like there is no, I feel like the more I've learned about the brain, the more I realize how much I don't know. It's like this kind of, opposing line, right? Like the more you know, the more you don't know. And I love that because it gives us so much more to appreciate about ourselves. Like that's one thing, this whole idea of give yourself grace, ease into things, like your brain is a beautiful thing if you just allow it to do its natural things, right? And again, if you sip water at the right time, and if you help it, right, as opposed to work against it, is what I've learned sort of from reading you and like watching you and checking out your LinkedIn insightful posts. I'm like, man, that's so cool. Like we don't have to force anything. If we just understand this thing a little bit better, we can kind of work with it. And it's like going down river as opposed to climbing this mountain that feels insurmountable almost. So I love that about your work. I think you've helped me at least understand a few things. Like, again, I had you on because I was kind of selfish, to be honest. But this is obviously helpful for a lot of creatives who are watching too. So
thank you.
Given the brain's this is sort of one of my last questions about deeper stuff into your book. The brain's evolutionary mismatch of the modern 9-to-5. What adjustments can organizations make to support more brain-friendly schedules? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it is such a great question. So everyone's different, right, with their natural proclivities for whether or not they're a nighthawk, they're a morning person, they're kind of ambidextrous, they're kind of in between. So everyone has differences there. So that's the first thing, is kind of acknowledging, hey, everyone will work on a different, it won't be 9-to-5. That's maybe the average of the aggregate, but the average never works for any single person because by definition, the average is a mythical number. And so to understand that there could be like a shift in time. I think the second thing of that is the idea that, there is going to be this dip in the day where there is no productivity, and to expect a ton is not a realistic expectation, not for employer, not for employees. So it's, customizing and understanding if this science were to pervade, you would customize not only the schedule of the day, but also the physical environment, right? Like we wouldn't have cubicle farms. We would have something that invites a lot more of nature indoors. And we would be scheduling things in 45-minute, 50-minute increments with a break in between, with like a lot more time for breaks, which I remember you'll appreciate because you mentioned earlier, like I talked to a lot of major Fortune 100s and big companies. And I remember this director of like a big company, definitely no big bank. And he came to me later and he's like, oh, great. Thanks so much. Now all my direct reports think they can have a break every 40 minutes or something. And I said, listen, the thing about that though, is that the science is in, they will take more time to have those breaks, but their brain will produce faster, more productively in their uptime. And so you'll actually get more out of them, not less, and they will feel better, not burn out. And so there, that's the other piece about working with your brain. And so I think to understand the science is to not only change how you work, what you expect of yourself, how your schedule would align to your natural proclivities for, you probably get up and do your hardest, heaviest lifting. You might not waste your mornings on emails or the treadmill. You might do your biggest stuff then. To understand, you probably have a second wind later in the day, that you do have this lull in the middle of the day so that you'll do different things. Like your dad would say, like, I say in the afternoon is when you do the 4 M's: move, meetings. So move around physically, do your exercise then, have meetings, mail or email. Like that's when you'll do all of your correspondences. And then ministrations or administration, things that are not cognitive heavy lifting, but they are required for every business, for every person. And then what that allows is that, you're taking the stuff that didn't require a ton in the way of cognitive compute, and you're doing it in times when, you were not like, you're going to be cognitively exhausted, and you're waiting for that wave to come back, and then you can do some other stuff. You would organize, your physical space. You would also probably, and this goes to the merit framework, which is in the book, but you would probably reprioritize relationships with people at work, specifically, like how you're interacting with them, when you're interacting. Like, they shouldn't have the best of the morning from you, but you do want to make sure you have some sense, a physical sense of social support at work. So there's lots of little like takeaways that I think are really important for people to, to be able to understand and therefore work with and so on. There's another key piece. It's that when you, and this is, we can prove this, we've shown this in fMRIs, MRIs. When you tell a person that, your brain is in charge of all perception and reality and, personality and outcomes, and that you can control a lot of this, that this is a masterpiece of your own mind, mindset's important. Actually, what happens is the brain itself starts to operate better. So that's the first thing. So it actually is more efficient. It starts to activate more neural areas, et cetera. But it also gives something that's really important to people right now, which is a reclaimed sense of autonomy and agenda and choice and control. And I think one of the things that the pandemic served to do, which is probably why we're having such a mental health epidemic now, is that people were started to really externalize a lot of what was happening to them. And, when you weren't given opportunity to go outside of quarantine, or you weren't given medical autonomy, or you weren't given a lot of choice and circumstances, then what happens is, as your choice gets stripped from you, you have this learned helplessness, and you externalize a lot of your environments, a lot of the things that happen in your mind, a lot of the things that happen in your life. And so to understand, it's sort of a philosophical point, but it's the point of saying, not only to realize that your brain works the way that it does, to remember your brain, does your brain itself work better, but it also grants you permission to take control back and to be much more agendic about how your day proceeds, your life, your career, your work day. And also to remember, like, you do have control, you do have choice. These are choices you are making. And then to re-internalize, we talk about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, but like more than motivation, this is a lot too about where and how you perceive your locus of control in your life, and to have an internal locus of control. And then to remember that the world is not this externalized, uncontrollable, completely unpredictable place, but that you have a microcosm version of that you can control, is part of, I think, the implicit message, and part of what I'm hoping people are sort of slowly, reawakening to.
Yeah. So powerful. I just gotta say, like, I appreciate your approach to, not only the brain, but its application to the work environment, right? I mean, we talk a lot about work culture, all the social things around work, right? But once we realize that, like, the thing that actually moves us in the right direction is further understanding how our brain works, how our minds actually produce the reality in which we live in, and how we can work cohesively together with it and with others to make a great atmosphere to go to work in, right? And I really appreciate that. And it's helped me think about a lot of things, especially with my team, since we're kind of virtual and I work from home predominantly. But it's helped me understand myself more, understand like how I like to work, and that's okay. Like, to how I used to think about work. And I appreciate that, because, we have this fantastic instrument that is hands down literally the best thing on earth, because how we experience Earth, in my personal opinion. But further understanding it helps me further appreciate it. And you really helped me appreciate it more. So thank you for that. And your book is fantastic. I'm literally, I think I got 2 more chapters left to get through it. So I'm really excited to put it back on my wall here. All the books that I love. And I'm excited for other people out there. If you're creative, if you're just a person who works, which most of you are, go out there, get this book. I promise you, it's worth the read. It's so beautifully written. Dr. Brynn, I know you put a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources, literally a lot of time, because we met a few years back.
Yeah, we did.
For those who want to put their expertise and package it into a book and do the things that you do, like speaking and all these things, what is, a piece of advice for those that struggle through those things, that struggled like in the idea of like, what if people think this way or that way about my knowledge or myself or my work? How do you contextualize this and, use, I guess, your story or your way of going forward through understanding of the mind and brain. How does someone go, I guess, over the hurdle of fear from taking the expertise and churning it into a book and putting it out into the public? Like, what's your advice there?
It's a great question, because I don't know that, I mean, I think, there's often that adage, like everyone has a book in them, but sometimes a book isn't the right go-to-market. Like, and I think of things in context of go-to-market strategies and, a business strategy, because as a business person, I would, but I think about, like, that's not always the right move. So that's the first thing is, critically evaluate the idea of like, oh, is a book the right activation of what I know and how I know it and how I want to go to market with this, because there's lots of other alternatives. You could also consult about it, chant about it, like people get creative. I mean, there's lots of ways to go to market with what your unique contribution is. I think the second thing that so that's first, just critically evaluate how you want to go to market. Second is I often think about like deciding, fear often comes from unknown, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And the idea that I think if you understand what you want to say and what you don't want to say, like what is your lane, I think that's important too. And so I often ask students or people I'm mentoring, coaching or whatever, what do you do better and differently than other people? Or what is it that you think you can go to market with better and differently than someone else? And that will answer a lot of questions for you about like, what do you care about? What matters to you? How do you want to go to market? What do you want to go to market with? And how can you make a unique contribution in terms of how you package, what you know into something that others can use, hopefully others can use. So that's the second thing, better and different. So critically evaluate better and different. And then I think when if you do come to the place where, okay, you're going to, and I know we talked about this earlier, who's saying, but if you are going to, publish a book, there's lots of ways to do that now. There's a ton of ways to do that now. And so you can go classic, historical, traditional publishers, but you can also do self-publishing. You can also do a hybrid publisher, which is how I ultimately netted out. And I tried both the other alternatives. So I had a contract to write the book as an author with a major publisher. I also went to a self-publishing option at one point. And they all have pros and cons. I mean, I think from a perspective of like coach, speaker, professor, mentor, what for me was really important was to own the copyright and to own my intellectual property and to not have other people, not have to pay royalties to be on a podcast like this and read from my own book. And then also be able to reuse it in media and elsewhere. But then, ownership over and creative control over, because there's a lot of people, like I'll interrupt myself here and say, there are a lot of entities, organizations, especially in traditional models of not just publishing, but in the music industry, in the movie industry, that will take advantage of and try to, control the creator, the producer. And that's because they don't produce anything. And so I think not underestimating the value of your own production and of your own creative output is really important. And I think, that is why, I mean, you hear all the time, like Taylor Swift and other artists saying, betting on myself was the best thing I could do. And re-recording her masters was important as an example, because then she could control her own creative output and own her own creative output. There are a lot of people when you are in our industry, Hussein, that are going to try to like take advantage or are going to try to own your content or are going to try to control you in your creative output and your content. And for me anyway, ownership of a lot of that, the retention of that creative output and control was so important. But also especially if people are new to these industries, they're new to all of this, then just caveat emptor, like just be aware of the fact that there are whole businesses, intermediaries, middlemen, moderator people in the environment, organizations in the environment designed to control that and to capitalize on it. And so maintaining that for yourself is, I think, also important, whether it's a book or other creative output. Again, kind of a philosophical point, but it's like the idea that there's not a ton of people with like real creative, prowess that put in the elbow grease to do it. And so you want to be careful with what hands that lands in, whether that's book, whether that's your recording artist, whether you're an actor, like whatever it is that you do.
Right.
Yeah, maintaining that's important.
That's remarkable, and it's such great advice, because those are some of the things that I say to a lot of different, experts and who want to become authors, and even authors who, independently publish and kind of want to try the traditional publishing route, and I always say, look, it always comes down to your professional goals, your outcomes, the things that you're really after, but do the research, go out there and like ask people and ask how they did it and see the different experiences that can help give you the best sort of pathway forward for yourself. But don't get stuck in that route, right? Like, I think that's some people kind of get stuck in that loop of like indecision. And I say, you know, make the best decision for yourself that matters the most. And I think owning our creativity, that's always very important. So really watch for the opportunity that you can do that, or if you can't do that, I think that's very important. So good for you for like making the path. What's that?
Yeah, you have to read the fine print, right? Like read that.
Oh my God.
When you find out you don't own your own copyright, you don't own your own IP anymore. You'd have to like
get out of there.
You'd have to pay a royalty to say this stuff that you wrote down to that. Like that's
really weird.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like there's a right time and a place for sure for traditional publishers of both the written manuscript, varietal, and others. But yeah, it's especially if you're new, there's a lot of opportunity for people to take advantage of you because they are going to control creative output. They're not themselves producers. And the thing is about producers, as you know, like you end up honing a skill, something specific, and you're not necessarily the expert in bringing that to market. You're not the expert in how to write that down or how to act that out or how to sing it or how to, put it on a label. Like you need help for going to market.
Right.
And I think those are some stage gatekeepers that can be ultimately devastating to your career. I mean, I think the other thing, and you just touched on it, but I think it's an important point, is the idea that, almost like a bad yearbook photo or something, it will live as evidence of what you were capable of doing at the time. So you do want to put a lot of like research and intention behind the shelf life of it, because and that also comes back to control, because if someone else controls your creative output, you will look back on that 10, 20, 25, it lives forever. The internet's forever, 50 years from now, and think, shoot, it didn't manifest the way that I wanted it to. And that's because I didn't have the right control. I didn't have the right amount of say. I let someone else sway me because I was new at this. And so, you do want to think about longevity and shelf life of things. So yeah, you don't want to spend forever in indecision, but you do want to think longer term too, because these artistic and productive works are like, they last your whole career.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing the beautiful insights. I have like one more question for you, and that is really around, the thing that I try to help authors with is what's next? Like now that the book is published and you have this amazing, remarkable piece of work, what is your intention, your goals for the rest of the year in 2025, right? How do you plan to use this amazing piece of work to, is it to grow your business? Is it to grow your speaking? Is it to just spread the message, or all the above? Like, what are your intentions? I'm just curious because I love hearing those kinds of things from authors.
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely, like, it's to grow the business. I considered it to be partly just well overdue in my research and life. And then secondly, almost like marketing collateral, right? Like this is a thing that is designed to feed my family. So sure. So build the business. But the thing that it is actually to help people, which was always the impetus. It never really mattered what I was doing, whether I was a professor, whether I was teaching, coaching, like the idea that I was just trying to help people do better with what they had and to achieve better outcomes for them in their own life. And again, by dispelling some of the falsehoods so that they could work properly with the machine they've been, graced with. Right. So that is of interest, is just to continue to kind of go to market however the market wants me to go to it. And sure, build the business. But we also have plans for, I'm thinking out loud here, okay, so don't hold me to it because intermediaries will have their say, but is the idea of like audiobooks that are free, basically like freeware that you can, might have to sign up, might be email gated, but just the idea that like you're going to be able to listen. We didn't do an audiobook off the bat, so definitely want to produce the audiobook. There are courses associated with this. So like speaking, there's training, there's workshops that already exists. And those are typically done at the conferences or in custom programs for corporations. But then like something that is B2C, that is not just like B2B is business to business, B2C is like for consumers, people on social media, people out in the world, something that they can consume. And so we're still giving thought to like what that strategic action is like, how do we go to market for just individuals who want to know this stuff? Because of course the book was written for like the individual, right? Like you are the hero, it's your brain we're talking about. But I do want to kind of go to market with something that is more readily accessible. And so I think that's like training, a course, maybe some freeware, like some audiobook type
Very
stuff
cool.
for sure. And then it's, this probably firsthand, you probably heard it 100 times, but I kind of in practice now at like how to write, not just what to write. And I have my second book. I can't say what the name is, but I have my second book content and substrate already. So I think that's frankly, while the iron is hot, I'm going to strike and just keep writing and producing, because I know what books number 2 and 3 are. And so that's another like personal goal or whatever. Like if you ask me, what does my business cycle look like? I think different than many years to follow, I'll probably roll right back into the production of what I know to be the next manuscript. Yeah.
Fantastic. I love that. Dr. Brynn, you are a wealth of wisdom, knowledge, and compassion by sharing all this stuff with me and this amazing audience. So thank you for coming on the show today. Seriously, I've not only learned so much from you, but just reconnecting with you and picking up your book and hearing about all the things that you're dreaming up. I just love hanging out with you and sort of watching your journey flourish. Of course, happy holidays, happy New Year. Cheers to you and your team. This is an excellent book. If you're out there and you want to learn how the brain works, I promise you, this is a book you want to get. Not only about how the brain works, but really it's all about how you work, like just how you get to do things. It's an amazing read. Thank you. So go out there, get the book, drbrynn.com, BRYNN.com, or Amazon. Get your copy today. Don't sleep on it. Thank you for watching. Peace.
Thank you.